I have the summary of that. In more. Okay, so is this, can you find this on the AWA website?
Our event?
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, because I had someone ask if it was virtual and I was like, oh, I don't know.
So our event
So-
is on our website. We don't have the online link at the website just because we've had problems with doing that before in the past, like just like people who don't want to meeting it.
Oh, really?
Like hackers, like just like trying to like hack the whole thing and just moving forward on the screen. It was really bad.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was we're all scarred from it, so we do not have the link registered.
Okay, so
Yeah.
can you still register?
You can register and or she can just email me and I'll run upstairs and reply to her email with a link.
Okay.
So my email, if you'd like.
Okay, so, yeah.
Sure, no problem.
Is that an hour? Do you like it?
We don't mind it. Yeah, it works well enough. Are you thinking of getting one?
Yes. And I don't know, I go back for,
What is it?
it's for our board meetings.
Okay, board meeting, I'd suggest it's pretty good. Like I love that the second someone starts talking, it goes to them,
Right.
and it's the voice. So I think that's handy, especially if you're doing like a virtual or hybrid meeting.
Mhm.
For our events, I find it's like kind of hit or miss. Some people, I don't know if they're just not turning up the volume on their screen, but they're like, we can't hear anything. And so we have like a booster mic and no, some people don't complain at all, and some people do, but generally for board meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've never been to our building, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a different heritage. building. And with primary.
Okay, so if you'd like,
Yeah.
Cottage store and, building range.
Oh, okay.
Grade 1 and 2. were the only grades.
There. Yep.
should I drag it onto our,
There's
desktop?
not a lot of good.
Yeah.
And then we have.
I'll just give
Yeah,
you.
the library. Fire. And so forth. No.
Amy Tucker?
Yes.
Over to AB.
Oh, that is funny. Weird. Yeah, so outreach at abwild.ca.
Hello, how are you? Good, how are you?
Thank you, I'm Pamela.
Nice to meet you. I'm Lindsay.
Sorry, it's tea.
What was that?
Oh, I don't know.
Do you need a hand with anything? I think we're generally pretty good and we do have a volunteer coming.
Oh, okay.
I mentioned to her on the phone. I was like, I'm not sure we need a ton of help this evening, but I mean, it's still good to have. Okay.
Good evening, I'm Deborah Donnelly, I'm the Executive Director here at AWA. Thank you for coming to be part of it this evening. I thought it'd be a packed house, but I know this time of year it's always challenging to get people showing up in person, but we do have a few people online as well. So I know the discussion tonight is going to be a bit of a presentation and I'll take questions and answers. So if you have any topics that you want to discuss, feel free to ask them. And I would like to introduce our speakers for this evening. So Forbes is a third generation rancher from Southeastern Alberta. Your ranch abuts Suffield.
Not well, the South Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Straight south of the military base itself.
So that gives you sort of an idea of where it's located, nice and dry. And he's committed to sustainable ranching practices. His passion for ranching extends beyond cattle. And as he devotes a lot of his time to raising and working with his team of horses, a tradition he holds dear. And outside of the ranch, Kyle's an active member of his local community and a dedicated 4-H leader for his kids' 4-H club, where he helps youth develop leadership skills and foster their connection to agriculture, and is known for his strong work ethic, love for his family, and deep-rooted commitment to both his community and the land he calls home. And I had the pleasure of working with him recently on the Ministry Advisory Committee on recreational access. So thank you, Kyle. He is currently the chair of the Alberta Grazing Leaseholders Association, being the LA, and so if you have any questions about grazing leaseholds, and he's I would also like to welcome Lindsay Murphy.
Yes.
For, should have asked you. For the past 9 years, Lindsay has served as the manager of the Alberta Grazing Leaseholders Association, beef industry producer advocacy group with a mandate centered on crown grazing dispositions and those who operate on them. Lindsay is driven by her passion for the success and sustainability of the agricultural industry, with a particular interest in leveraging the environmental benefits of agricultural systems. We're all for that as well. Lindsay has strong roots in both crop and livestock agriculture and holds a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture. And outside of work, she's an avid foodie and sports fan. Kind of sports? You name it, pretty much. Yeah. Who loves spending time with her family. So I would like to welcome them both. They'll lead off the discussion and then be open to questions and answers. So thank you again.
Is there a remote or do I just say next?
Just next slide.
Okay. I don't know if I know the slide deck well enough to be like.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much to AWA to hosting us tonight. As she mentioned, we have a short presentation, but we really just wanted to also open it up for discussion. If you guys have questions, if you have specific topics that you want to talk about in regards to grazing leases, we would want to answer your questions here. And I wanted to start with a little bit of history, next slide, on the grazing. Sorry. No, that's okay. That's okay. So the current form of Alberta's grazing leases dates back to 1881. In that year, the Dominion Lands Act and the Dominion Order in Council number 803 vested in the holders of crown grazing leases strong tenure rights in an effort to stimulate investment into the cattle industry and also promote environmental stewardship of the grass resource. So there's two pressures that go into building this system: is stimulation of the cattle industry and protection of the grass. In the early 1800s, the Canadian government was under pressure to honor their commitments under Treaty 7 to the Indigenous peoples of the South in 1877. And in that treaty, they were obligated to supply food. And at that time, the native bison herd was largely eliminated due to overharvesting. So they needed to find a solution to that. In an effort to attract investment, to increase the number of cows, to avert starvation in the Indigenous population, the government created a lease tenure system that allowed ranches for as large as 100,000 acres with 21-year renewable lease terms. I think it's next. Yes. So we have to look at what was happening in the United States at the time because it had a huge influence on how our system was designed. Our grazing lease system was developed in the context of the range wars in the United States, which led to environmental degradation that was occurring on the Great Plains between 1866 and 1885. The US system inadvertently created an environmental policy disaster that is famously described in Garrett Hardin's article, The Tragedy of the Commons, which was published in the journal Science. So the tragedy of the commons is the situation whereby a resource is owned by everyone, but no one is given the responsibility to take care of it. So it results in degradation and damage to the resource. It's well documented that Canada's elected officials at the time were acutely aware of what was going on in the United States and wanted to build something better up here in Canada. I think next. Okay, there we go. So the story actually really begins with the American Civil War. And as the Union Army was pushing south, they eventually, in 1863, cut off the Confederate Army's supply lines across the Mississippi River. So at that time, America's largest beef herd was in Texas, and that cut off any chance of any of that beef going across the Mississippi to the Confederate Army. So the herd in Texas was allowed to grow unchecked until the end of the war in 1865. And at that time, Texas had over 5 million cows. So then the American ranchers and the investors decided to push large herds of cattle north to the Great Plains, which would be Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, Colorado, the Dakotas, and Montana. And the end of the Civil War also brought a huge increase in the demand for meat because the cities in the US and the East and the Midwest were growing and they wanted to be fed after the war, of course. So the Great Plains not only gave large tracts of free grass, but they also had access to the railway system so ranchers could get their products to the cities where all the demand was. So really a perfect situation for the cattle industry. Oh no, sorry, we're still not. So in the period of 1866 to 1885, the United States had an open range policy. The United States Supreme Court declared that public lands of the United States, especially those in which the natural grasses are adapted to the growth and fattening of domestic animals, shall be free for the people who seek to use them where they are left open and uninvolved. The effect of this open range policy was that whichever rancher could get his cows to the grass first got the grass. And this led to intense competition among the ranchers. But at the same time, it led to obviously decimation of the rangeland health and eventually what was known as the Dust Bowl. At the same time, the US sheep herd was increasing. So not only was there fierce competition between ranchers, but there was also conflict with sheep herders as well. So this led to act like literal range wars. People were being killed and water sources were being poisoned. Like everything that you see in the classic Western Hollywood movies was actually based on truth. So, next slide. So back in Canada, Senator Cochrane and Sir Johnny MacDonald were debating on how to avoid the range wars and the environmental degradation that they were seeing in the States, while at the same time creating sufficient security tenure to attract the investment needed for a viable cattle industry. So they rejected what was going on in the States and instead In 1881, the Canadian grazing lease system was designed to create a lease of real property at common law, based on the Australian law. From 1882 to 1886, hundreds of thousands of acres of crown grasslands were placed under grazing lease, and Western Canada's cattle industry came into being. In maybe next one? No. In 1905, Alberta became a province, but the crown lands, including grazing leases, continued to be administered by the Government of Canada in Ottawa. It wasn't until 1930, with the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement and the associated amendments to the Constitution Act of 1867, where the control and ownership of crown lands, including grazing leases, was transferred from Canada to Alberta. The Alberta government carried forward the crown grazing lease system and the Dominion Lands Act into the Provincial Lands Act, which has since been renamed the Public Lands Act. And that is the legislation that grazing leases exist under today. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Kyle, and he's going to talk about today's grazing leases.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks everybody for having me. I'm terrible with notes, so I'm better just rambling.
Do you want this?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'll cover off what grazing leases are today. So in the province of Alberta right now, there's approximately 5,700 grazing leases spread from north to south. That doesn't include the special areas and leases that exist in there. Leases outside that are covered under the Public Lands Act cover about 5.2 million acres. So for that, what that means for our beef industry, grazing leases represent approximately 20% of Alberta's beef industry. The majority of Alberta does rely on them at some point of the year in some fashion, whether that's as cow calf production or as background fattening cattle, that kind of thing. These leases contribute significantly to the economic stability of our ranching communities throughout Alberta. We rely on them for economic viability of our operations, and the system supports livelihood of Albertans and contributes to the broader agricultural community. Grazing leases are managed under a sustainable grazing system. So being that, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay. We're under a lot of rules from the government when it comes to how we utilize our leases. We're held to annual stocking rates, so that's a determination that's made up by the agrologists when they come out to inspect our grazing leases. They evaluate the available forage that's there. They take into account what the wildlife might need in the area, how much grass we can utilize, and then also looking to leave some carryover behind. So in the area of the southeast where I'm at, we look at usually if you think of it in thirds, we try to graze a third, leave about 2/3 of that grass behind, whether that's in carryover litter for the following year or trampled back in by the cattle through the process, but making sure that we're keeping ample litter out there in the ground. So our grazing leases in that respect, we're required every year to also fill out stock return forms. So that's usually due at the end of January. So with that, as leaseholders, we're required to report how many cattle we stocked on that lease, for what period of time. They take into account such things as like the weight of the animals, because that can affect how much grass resource there is for us to utilize on the correct rate. So obviously a 1,600 pound cow is going to eat less than the 1,200 pound cow. So when they look at our stock return forms, they can make adjustments to those carrying capacities based on your operation. Two main pressures that we deal with on ranches in the province is definitely trying to keep things in the best shape that we can. Obviously, we're trying to carry on not just for next year, but future generations to keep them on the land. So making sure that land is utilized in a sustainable manner, that there's ample grass left behind, that we're not overusing our water resources, that kind of thing. You're balancing that also with the economic side of things, right? At the end of the day, we are a business. I still have the banker calling me at the end of the day, wanting his cut, he wants his mortgage, so, you know, I still have to balance the amount of grass that I have, how do I utilize that, but also paying my bills and make sure I keep my operation whole, so. Definitely a lot goes into these kind of things. We have definitely a deep connection to the land, you think, you know, it's where we live, it's our backyards, I see it every day. You know, if an area gets overgrazed, I'm acutely aware of that. I see it every time I go out there. I'm not happy to see it. It, you know, stresses me out to see that. So, you know, over time, you kind of realize through some trial and error, how can you improve ways? You know, you're constantly adjusting and adapting to the land and how, whether it's changing weather conditions, you know, how the cattle are utilizing the grass, where they're sticking in the field. You're always trying to adapt with nature and work with it rather than trying to work against it, because I think we all can realize that more as man, we try to put a finger on nature, it never seems to work. It's always going to fly and way around us, so it's often better to find ways to work with it. Ranchers, we see significant investment into our grazing leases. So as Lindsay had pointed out, when leases were first established, they were basically a bare plot of land. So the original ranchers had to go in, we had to develop water sources on these leases, we had to pay to fence them. We also had to purchase them initially from the government. So the initial lease had to be purchased, and then we had our own cost, had to do all of the investment so that those leases could then hold cattle. In areas further to the north, a lot more investment goes into that. Those guys are having to clear brush, they're having to plant pastures, that kind of thing. So thousands of dollars goes into those leases off the bat, and not to mention the ongoing cost of, you know, if you purchase that lease, you also have a mortgage then that is due, you know, for the purchase of that lease. You're paying municipal property taxes on that grazing lease, you're then paying the rent on that grazing lease, as well as then paying for all the upkeep of everything to keep your cattle out there. So you're keenly aware of how much goes into that. When I first became chair of the AGLA, some of the first questions I got was around that same question of, well, how much value do leaseholders provide to the government? So a few years ago, we utilized Saracon research to kind of take a look at that and see what costs and what value we as leaseholders bring to people of Alberta. So if you were to take us as leaseholders completely out of the equation, and every year the government was to maintain those water sources, maintain the fences, do everything that we do on the land currently, it would cost the department upwards of $70 million per year. And we all know the government doesn't do anything cheaply, so 70 million is probably more easily like 100 million. So there is vast value in what we do on the land, and that equates to great returns for us when you look at how much of our native grasslands have been saved under the grazing lease model. Ranchers they're more or less paying the Albertan people for the privilege to manage grazing leases on your behalf, so that these grasslands are not just here for our families, but for all of the people of the province. So, with that, so we also take on a lot of the land management, as I said, when it comes to grazing leases. So that's things such as weed control is under our control. So if our agrologist comes out and they notice that there's invasive species, weeds, that kind of thing, that's on us to go out and manage those invasive species. So that whether that's spraying, targeted grazing, that kind of thing, fire control, ecosystem maintenance. So dealing with just the animals and how they're interacting on land. Industrial activities, so when there's things such as oil and gas development, that kind of thing, we as the leaseholder really do not have a say whether that activity takes place. We get some say. I can work with the oil and gas company to make sure that the location and access roads, that type of thing, go in areas where they have the least amount of impact to the environment and to my operation. So kind of making sure that they're avoiding, you know, wetlands or, you know, areas that I might notice that are, for example, in my area, a lot of sand. So if I notice an area, there's, you know, I don't want you going over that hill, it's very sandy, try to have them go around it. And then on top of that, the life cycle of any of those industrial sites that are on our grazing leases, we as a leaseholder are required to keep an eye on that. So right through from any activity that happens out there, if there's spills, pipeline breaks, more often than not, it's the leaseholder that is often the guy who's out there discovering that thing and then is having to contact you on gas company and then make sure that the site is then put back into a manner that is, I guess, up to code with some of the things that the department has said. That's awfully tough to do nowadays, just, you know, again, understaffing of the government and some of the changes that they've made to reclamation requirements on things. That kind of puts a lot more onus on us as the leaseholder to make sure that those things are being done properly. A lot of those reclamations now, they've gone to kind of a self-assessment model for the oil and gas companies, that a lot of those end up being rejected because they don't seem to be done properly or things are missed. So then those misses are often found by us as the leaseholder when we go out and take a look at the site prior to getting a reclamation certificate. As Lindsay kind of said, the grazing lease system, you know, predates Alberta, 143 years. The grazing lease system has been in existence in Western Canada. I would say it's probably the most proven conservation method that we have in Canada when you think of the terms that the amount of grassland that it's been able to conserve. Without the grazing lease system, I would worry that the majority, if not all of our grasslands in this province probably would have been eliminated, you know, when you look at the expansion into the 20s and 30s. And, you know, again, government trying to tell people that, you know, Southeastern Alberta is a great place to grow wheat. It is when it rains. It doesn't happen very often. The Metro Buffalo, it probably should have stayed that way. And, you know, the more that we can keep it in grasslands, the better for not just us as ranchers, but yeah, the people of the province. I think that's about what I have.
Yeah. Next slide. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just our website, so if you're looking to get a hold of us, we have website, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I've never been on TikTok, it is, but we have. If you need to get a hold of any of us, Lindsay's phone number is there, but you can find my number on the website. Like Deb said, if you guys have any questions, for sure, just feel free to reach out. You know, I don't mind answering questions. I'd rather you got the right information than the amount of misinformation that's out there nowadays. So again, thanks for having us here tonight. And our kind of hope was that we have, you know, this bit of a presentation here for you. And then if there's any questions from you guys or things that you'd like to know about, we're here to kind of have those discussions with you
guys. So I guess I'll just start so we get the ball rolling. But what are some of the issues that you face as ranchers from the general public? Or how do you perceive the general public looks at grazing leases?
There's a lot of politics of it, just because a lot of people don't understand. The grazing lease system itself is so complicated. There relies so much on regulations, and you have to read the Public Lands Act, that type of thing. And then it's so complex when you look at all the different dispositions that are out there in the land, farm dispositions, grazing licenses, grazing permits, forest grazing agreements. It can be very confusing for the public to understand what a grazing lease is and what their responsibility is. So a lot of people just want to access. And most people are good, but everybody's view of what is a proper activity on that grazing lease is different. The way you guys view using grazing lease and going out to walk and do that type of thing is different from the OHV group that sees a grazing lease and the river coulees and wants to go and climb the water dirt bike. So trying to balance all that can be very difficult, especially when you spent in a lot of cases generations out there trying to keep it in that state. So for example, I'm down on the South Saskatchewan River. Miles of river coulees, but incredibly sensitive. So my area, a lot of it was never homesteaded to begin with, still native grass, but it's sandy, and if you get motorized access in along the coulees, that damage lasts for generations. So, like I said before, we're acutely aware of not just when I overgraze, but I know where every set of vehicle tracks is on that ranch, every old wagon trail. So I've been told my entire life, I'm not allowed to drive my truck along the coulees, all these things that I've spent my life being told not to do, that my grandpa told my dad, I'm now telling my kids. But in the course of a weekend, if someone doesn't respect that, that can turn that clock back a generation. So you get out there and once one trail is made along the coulees, well, the next guy comes out and he says, well, there's a trail, I can drive that. Now, on and on it goes, that cumulative impact, and you end up with damage. So we're balancing that is incredibly tough sometimes, especially in areas where you have high pressure. Like we have some leaseholders south of Calgary and Porcupine Hills where they're dealing with thousands of phone calls throughout the year. So imagine on top of trying to run a ranch, you're also now every day trying to answer 15 or 20 phone calls on top of trying to get your cattle in or do any of the business jobs that you're trying to do. So it just adds something extra on top of us and it can get very time consuming.
Legally, what access does the public have to,
So on grazing leases,
racing?
yeah, once I have cattle out, so under the recreational access regulation, I can deny access under certain conditions. So if I have livestock in the field, I can deny access. If there's a fire ban in place that's put on, like if my municipality puts a fire ban on, I can deny access. And if your access is anything other than on foot, so if you hunt with a bike or a horse, do any of that kind of stuff. But if I do not have cattle present on the grazing lease and you call and you ask to access on foot, I am required under legislation to provide you with access.
Same with hunters?
Yes, yeah. So, yeah, their recreational access regulation doesn't specify between hunting and fishing and bird watching and all that. So hunting season does get kind of hairy if you're trying to get all those groups out there safely and not have somebody get shot. At the end of the day, right, like we don't want to see anybody get hurt out there. So we're also trying to balance our safety with your safety, with everybody else's enjoyment of the.
But you monitor that.
Yes,
That's.
Yeah. Yeah, as a leaseholder, I can deny access. If you're not happy with the response that I get, like say I deny you access and you say, well, no, Kyle, you don't have cattle present. There is steps as a recreationalist that you can take. It starts by phoning the local agrologist, and then you have that discussion with the agrologist. The agrologist would then phone me and, you know, have an informal discussion. Hey, Kyle, you know, what's the story? Why aren't you providing access? If I say, I just don't feel like providing access to it, then that goes above that, and that goes up to a land settlement officer. And then as a settlement officer, if it goes to that step, then they can actually provide you with access, and then I can be represented as the leaseholder. So we have something that came out through the province here, say 2019, tenure for stewardship.
Yes.
So tenure for stewardship was something that was developed by the province in 2019. That came out as a way to reward leaseholders who were going above and beyond their legislative requirements of managing grazing leases. So if I have, you know, if I've shown over the last 10 years that I have no complaints, my lease is in excellent shape, I'm providing access under the recreational access stuff, and I have no complaints against me, I then get bumped into what they call tenure for stewardship, which then allows me to have a 20-year tenure on my grazing lease rather than the standard 10. So if that goes to a settlement officer, I then no longer, I lose my ability to obtain that 20-year tenure. And then also I can put myself under, you know, almost a red flag on your lease too. So more inspections, the government is, my inspectors now be paying more attention to the way I utilize them. But if you think of the tenure for stewardship, what is it? I think 60 or 75% of the grazing leases in the province that have been inspected have actually qualified for the tenure for stewardship. So that just kind of goes to show you the level of stewardship that's out there. You know, 80% plus of your grazing leaseholders are attaining or doing above and beyond what they're required to do by the.
Just in regards to hunting, why do you think that hunters always want to go on grazing leases? I think that's a really important thing that people don't think about.
That's where the game is. You know,
And why is that?
because they're managed so well. it's not a free for all, like, no, you see it all the time, those guys don't want to go out and the unmanaged public land and have, oh, well, I walked 2 miles out to my tree stand, got out there before the sun came up, got myself all set up, and here comes 4 other guys. When they get set up, I can see the 4 other guys in the trees around me. You know, they want to have a quality experience just as much as the next person does, so grazing leases just tend to get targeted. It's just management of it. It speaks to, I guess, to the biodiversity, I guess.
Are there
Any other?
questions?
Water resources, I mean, water's just getting enough water, and it is gradually gonna be less as the glaciers melt down, but also I hear there's more irrigation. Is that gonna influence the water that gets to your leases of that water?
I don't have the ability to, like, I'm along the river, but all of our leases, we just rely on spring runoff, right? So it's all dugouts, most of the southeastern Alberta is kind of like that, water wells are few and far between. So most of our stuff is just on strictly on runoff, so when it comes to that irrigation water that they're allocating, it should have an issue with us now. But for guys like me that are in the South Saskatchewan River Basin, our basin has been over allocated for 2006, you know, early 2010. So I actually right now, I can't go out on my own deeded land and dig a dugout. I can't get a permit or license to put in any new water infrastructure as it currently is. Even if that water, you know, all the coulees, all that water runs right off of my land, I can't go out there and capture any of that water. So water, I guess it goes back to the old John Wayne saying, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. That's in the next 10 years, that's the way it's gonna be. It's all our big fights in the province are gonna be over water and access.
But they're talking a bunch more irrigation area being set up. How are they gonna do that? They're gonna get more water.
The improvements that they're making when they're burying a lot of those pipes now, like if you think of all the evaporation, all the seepage and stuff from those canals. So they're saying that by putting in a lot of that irrigation infrastructure and that kind of stuff, by modernizing it, they're able to save a lot more water. I would like to know, just like you, because I live along the river, but we don't put up any of our own hay. I buy 100% of my own feed. I have no irrigation. I have no ability to get irrigation. So if I could access water and water, it's all like for my ranch, if I could get irrigation, if I could have 80 acres of irrigation, my ranch would be self-sufficient on feed. I would not have to purchase feed every year. So if you think every family in my area had the ability to access a section of irrigation land, that then solidifies our ability to sustainably use the rest of our ranch. But a lot of that irrigation development is being concentrated back into those big irrigation districts, right? Which, you know, doesn't necessarily help the greater agricultural community, maybe in my opinion. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just get the impression that some of the farming, they're trying to farm land that's too dry. They should, why are we wasting water? We got lots of land good land that's they're just building on it, you know. They just develop it and they don't use it for agriculture. Lots of grain and that high quality. They won't get this poor land that is actually needs rain and doesn't get it in the irrigated. It seems senseless. You know, that they don't get the development for, you know, all these industrial development on land that's not so productive.
Do you think we remember a lesson in 1930 when everything? Well, if you're familiar with Potato Gate years ago, where they were trying to convert a lot of native grassland in the southeast to irrigation, that was on my list. Something ranchers in my area have been fighting against that irrigation development, coming and taking over a lot of that native grass since the first one started in 1975. That's when families in my area started pushing back against large scale irrigation development in our little area. But, you know, it's he who has the money, right?
Well, I mean, irrigation's okay in some areas for transition, but if you're gonna do it in the desert, it's kind of hopeless.
Yeah.
Kyle, thank you for the history about the grazing leases. would I be right in thinking back in 1881, it was like 1 cent per acre?
I don't know, but it might be close, yeah, I couldn't give you a figure of
Okay,
what it
because
costs.
I remember the minimum being 100,000 acres.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like the government of Canada said, look, don't bother us if you've got less than $1,000.
Yeah, so in today's terms, like when you look, say if you were looking to purchase a grazing lease, the average is usually grazing leases are usually trading at least half to 3/4 the value of deeded land in the area.
Oh,
So quite a bit more, and then in 2017, there was a change made to the rental rate calculation. So prior to 2017, the rental rates in the province had been frozen at $2.04 since the early 90s. But as the beef industry, we pushed government to move to a different model on that. We're running into countervail challenges and trade challenges out of the United States on that. So as industry, we got together with the department to come up with a new rental rate formula that takes into effect our profitability on the grazing lease and the market value of the animal. So it works off of, you look at the purchase price of, say, a 600-pound steer calf in the springtime and the sale of an 800 or 900-pound steer calf in the fall time. And then they have every 5 years, the department sends out a questionnaire that asks us questions like, what is the local area charging for fencing and water maintenance? So so the department can get an idea of what our costs are. And then they use that formula to backtrack what is our profitability. And so every year now since 2017, our rental rate and what we pay for our grazing lease is constantly fluctuating. And as of this year, for our rental rate in 2024, it was actually the highest rental rate in the country for grazing leases. So it's, when you think of it, it was always, said it's very cheap to own a grazing lease. And our Sericom research project actually showed that it's actually more expensive to have a grazing lease than it is to rent private ground. Because if I rent private ground from my neighbor, he's paying the property taxes, he's doing all the development. I'm just going out there kicking my cows out, checking them once a week, taking them home in the fall. Or on that grazing lease, I'm that guy that has to pay the property tax, do all that. So all those costs, once they're factored in on that, it's actually comparable, if not more expensive, to have a grazing lease.
okay. Have some of your neighbors dryland farms?
Few, but very, very few, I would say.
Oh, very few. Okay, now they're allowed to pump water to the livestock. Are you allowed to pump water?
I could pump water. So in the big drought in 2001, we rented pumps from the environment and ran 4-inch irrigation line from the river out, what would we run, 18 miles of that pipe at a time to build dugouts and stuff so that we could have water for that year. Conditions didn't improve, and then later that year we sold our entire calendar just so that we would maintain the grass. So I still have PTSD from seeing those yellow trailers of that pipe. I hope I never have to do it again. We went through this drought without having to do a large destock, so that kind of, you live and learn, right? Everybody went through the last drought, we learned how to manage things better. So, you're constantly improving and learning, right?
Okay. Now, take your cattle. How much would each head of cattle need in water per day?
Oh. I should know that.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I know that dairy cattle need about 20 gallons of water.
Yes.
But if you're on a farm with lots of water,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Oh,
But I can see you've got the opposite problem.
Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah, my cattle, they're walking over a mile to the closest depot kind of thing, right?
Okay.
So it's water is few and far between. We have water wells, but when you're drilling 200 feet down to get water, and then 6 miles, 8 miles plus from power. Right now, like to put in a power line, you're looking at about $15,000 to $20,000 per mile to run power to these things. And then if you're looking at putting in, like I have one well, 200 feet deep, one to put a solar system on it. To put a solar system on it just to pump that water to the surface, I'm looking at over $60,000 just for a solar system.
And how much water can the solar system pump per day?
It depends on your well. So that well there, it's, what is it, maybe 6-7 gallons a minute would be my top end. I have wells that are, dealing with 1 to 2 gallons a minute. So, little, but it's sufficient, I guess, right? But for the most part, you rely on dugouts and runoff.
So you've got some strategically located ducats then?
Yeah, so in the early days, my grandpa went around and kind of developed water kind of in every section almost in some of our big summer fields.
Okay.
And that way that helps to disperse the chemicals through the field, right? So, and then I use on top of that, I have salt and minerals, so cows, just like humans, want salt. We also give them mineral, you know, things like phosphorus, copper, that kind of stuff. So I'll use strategic places of where I put my mineral throughout the summer, and that'll attract them to stay in those corners of the field. So if I notice, for example, I want them to graze the north end of that field, that we can put on. So for example, you know, what time of day do you want to be contacted, right? So you can put on there, I want to be contacted Monday to Friday between 9 and 3 p.m. or whatever, you know, your preference is. How many days prior to access? So we can put anywhere from, you know, 1 day, call me the day before you want access, to up to a week, that kind of thing. So contact me a week before. Yeah, whether I allow motorized access, all that kind of stuff. It hasn't been that user friendly. Up until the last year, it was really hard to use, almost impossible. I think that's what kind of drove a lot of people away from it. But in the last year, the department's kind of put some time back into it to make it more user friendly. You can now pull it up on your cell phone and it will work, provided you have cell phone service. But it will work. I'm not that techy, so I still have issues with it. But as Deb said, we were in the Minister's Advisory Committee, kind of looking at recreational access, and one of the recommendations that came out of that is the province utilizing more of a booking tool. So kind of like a hotels.com, that kind of thing, so that you can actually go in and look at dates, and then if some grazing leases are allowed to have user limits on their leases, so they can apply to the government as to how many people can access that lease per day. And by having a booking system like that, it would allow some oversight, right, to get away from Kyle's just letting his friends and family and that kind of thing on. It would actually provide some background that way, so it can say, you know, Dad access Kyle's grazing lease on such and such date and that kind of thing. So kind of just gives people a little bit more usability of things, but that would be a couple of years down the line.
What's the status of availability leases? Like, is it decreasing? Is it increasing?
Decreasing. So very, very few new grazing leases, if ever, come online. So you're basically dealing with the grazing leases that have been out there. In my area, grazing leases rarely if ever come up for sale, just because it's big generation places, right? So, and usually if they do come up for sale, it's, you know, it's between a neighbor or you know, young kid in the area, kind of trades that way. A lot more are starting to be traded on some of these online auction sites like CLH Bid and that kind of stuff. But a lot lot of that, like, a lot of leases that we see now that are trading hands tend to be a lot more in the northern end of the province. So, yeah, there's still, like, leases are still bought and sold every day. It's just finding one that's in your area, right? And you certainly can't pay the mortgages, just caps on leases. They cost you. Any other questions?
Bison.
Yeah.
Is a big thing for AWA. We're very much committed to Plains bison being listed as wildlife, and we're pushing for that. We want to work with ranchers to make sure that that transition, which is gonna happen, we only have to look and see that it's happening. How do the ranchers in your community sort of see bison?
I don't know how it would happen, to be honest with you. They don't get fences, they run through. So you think a lot of our developed areas are 8 to 5 bison. The only place he's gonna be able to roam is the ditches along the highway. I don't know if there's that much availability to have bison back as wildlife in large areas, unless you were, looking at reserves and that type of thing. That's up to those folks, how they. I think your average rancher would definitely have some concerns with fences, that kind of thing, disease, TB, that kind of thing, like brucellosis, how would that affect a larger beef herd? So I think
We had to ask.
it's a decent idea, but I just don't know how realistic it is on a large scale. You think, I'm thinking in that's the context of, say, it's a bunch of wild buffalo. There isn't anywhere for it to just wild
Anymore.
anymore. But if you were to take, now you gotta take how many guys you can put in business. So you can see some buffalo.
But do they look at the idea of like maybe stewarding their land by using bison versus?
I have a neighbor that he ranched bison for a number of years and stuff. Some guys do it. The market for it is really hard. So, that kind of thing, like if there was, a market for bison and they were worth quite a bit, you'd see guys go in that direction. But we had east of Medicine Hat, there was a guy, they raised buffalo there for years, and I think I just heard not that long they got it here too, but it's just access to markets for that is just not there still.
But isn't part of that because the beef industry is like really focusing on beef, not. If there was more encouragement for bison to, I'm just saying that if there's more encouragement for bison to be, made palatable.
It's come from the consumers, right? Like I don't mind eating buffalo, like it's a tasty meat and stuff, and do I want to eat it every day? Probably not. So, it's up to consumers. If consumers want to make that choice with their dollars, that's up to them. I don't see that the dairy producers certainly don't advocate for beef producers. Chicken producers don't advocate for me. We do a somewhat, I would say, awful job of advocating for ourselves when it comes to getting in front of our consumers. So I think that's something that the industry, we're trying to improve. The more we can get in front of folks like you and talk about what actually happens out there, the good things and the environmental benefits that come from having cattle on the landscape, I think it works out.
My apologies for being late, but I have a question about the water in the dugouts.
Yeah.
How do you maintain water quality, or do you have to test it? Do you have trouble with algae bloom and different quality?
You can certain times of the year. Ourselves, like I've never had a tree dugout that would get into it. Cattle for the most part, if you have enough dugouts spread out, they'll kind of, wander around, so there's not enough impact on them. Guys have gone the route of, fencing them off and providing off-site waters, that kind of stuff. Solar pumps where they pump it out to a little trough that's there. The studies have shown that cattle actually respond and put on more weight if they're provided access to fresh water, right? So my winter field right now, if it's not fenced off from the river, there's access to dugouts in the field, but they'll avoid the river, they'll walk a mile to the water well so they can drink out of the trough versus going near, they will drink out of the river. They can access that clean fresh water. They'll certainly go and send their cows. So they kind of regulate themselves that way. Guys will test in some areas, so. To the north of me, if you get in some of those areas where there's a lot of salt content and stuff, those guys will have to test water, especially in the summertime. You've had very little runoff and, lots of hot warm days and stuff. You can have a lot of salt content in there. There was a ranch here 2 or 3 years ago, kind of, what would be kind of west of Moose Jaw. They lost over 100 head, just because cattle got in and they drank some of that salt, too much of that salt water, and ended up killing a bunch of them. So something that, we guys in those areas, if they have those issues, they're keenly aware.
And is that easy to access, that kind of, those resources to do stuff like that? Is that easy to access as a rancher? Or is that like a day and a half of just getting it stuff done?
Yeah, it's getting out there. Because you think all the water you got in that trap, you got to obtain the samples, you then got to get it somewhere sent away, which can then take time, right? So if I'm dealing with something where I got to know, is that water palatable for those cattle? I need to know within days and
Not
weeks
weeks.
kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
So,
so I was just wondering how accessible, that it's not very,
yeah, I would say not very accessible, but probably for the guys that are using a lot, they would be in tune with, when they need to send them a sample.
Also a question from online. Cliff said, thanks Kyle, what do you see coming from Alberta as policy for OHV use on public
That's a tough one. I think their lobby group is very strong. They have a good ear in there right now with the ministry. So they're pushing very hard to have those types of activities take place in the landscape. Our hope is that through having conversations with groups like yours, we can learn to work together, because I think it's our goal as well. You gotta balance that activity, right? You can't just have everybody out there willy-nilly. We've seen that impact through areas like the castle and stuff, and some of the impact OGs can have on the landscape, so. Yeah, big horns, so it's, finding a middle ground there so that people can still have places to play, but how do we, where's the trade-off there?
And then we talked about this a little bit, follow up on that, how can we cooperate to keep motorized use off or restricted to designated routes? Because, as you said, there's a lot of pressure on OHV groups.
Yeah. I think it's just working together, right? It's something that we've worked on in the beef industry in the last year, is making sure that we're having regular conversations with all the groups. We're all kind of, so when we go to the government, we're speaking from the same song sheet. It's not AGLA came in and said, this and this about OHVs, AWA came in and said this. We're always stronger if we come from a common point of view. So, more we can have these open dialogues and conversations, into the future, I think, we can start to, it's just a matter of working together.
And there's an education and awareness.
Yeah, but the huge thing, is enforcement. That's a huge issue, is there's almost no enforcement of law. There's rules, there's fines that are in place, but exactly. And that's what we constantly hear. Like, I don't have the issue because I can see my dog run away for 3 days, but you get anyone that has trees, and the first thing they say to me is, I can hear them out there. You can hear that bike out there ripping around, cutting your fence, doing whatever. But how do you catch them? And even when you do catch them, you can yell at the guy, they're gonna tell you to F off and go about their way. If you're lucky enough to get an officer there, if they fight those tickets, in my own personal experience dealing with guys right now on OHV, they're almost all immediately tossed out of court for lack of evidence. There isn't really want to prosecute there. I caught a guy who was in my yard site, rifle out beside him, my kids on the front lawn, tried to drive right through my yard. All I did was, as he drove past me, I took a picture of his license plate. I finally got that guy charged and I went to court, the prosecutor told me I was hostile for taking a picture of his in my own yard. When he stopped, I walked up to the window, he pulled out his phone, started recording me, calling me an asshole, saying that I have a right to be here in front of my house, right? So as a landowner, and that's not a once a year thing, that's a couple times a year. So you think, when it comes to dealing with folks that are coming up, right, most stressful time here I have is hunting season, when people start showing up the door, because say some people are respectful, but there's a lot of folks that you just really don't care.
And then, one other question. So they have good relations with many ranchers, but some ranchers use the recreation access regs to prevent even foot access. The appeal process is cumbersome. What is the solution to that?
So some of the recommendations that came out, things like this is trying to improve that process, so kind of narrowing in some of those timelines. A lot of it has to do with when you get to that LSO stage, you have to think of the timeline, they gotta get in touch with me, the rancher, which might take a day or two if he doesn't get me on the phone right away. He has to get in touch with the recreationalist, which might take a day or two. It has to then go to the director, which has to go above the LSO, so there's all these steps that have to come into play there. So it just makes it a cumbersome process, no one at the end is really happy with that. So I think there's improvements to be made there, what they are at this point. I don't know what direction the minister is gonna take, but, I guess the hope would be that they would shorten those timelines, and then, again, working on education. I think the more we can educate people on their rights and responsibilities on both sides, we recognize, on the grazing lease side, there are definitely, all that need to be dealt with. So, we're working through that ourselves, and how do we kind of educate our membership and make people more aware of responsibilities, and again, then trying to get that information out to the public so they're more aware. When I go to grazing lease, what's expected of me, what I'm to do, and if I'm unhappy, what are the steps?
Well, sometimes, it can just be hard to get a hold of the leaseholder.
Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions, just to,
Sometimes
if you're really trying to get a hold of someone and just can't get through?
Sometimes it's, if you really can't get a hold of somebody and you're out in the area, try to find out where they live, go to their house, knock on the door. But in reality, like, the contact information that we provide to the department in a lot of cases is only as good as the people who are inputting. So previously, when we were giving a contact information to the department, it was something where I went into the office and I'd fill out a piece of paper with my phone number, my name, and all my conditions. Then that is then taken and tried to be transcribed by someone and put in the computer. Well, digits can be put in wrong, names. I went through, it took me probably 3 years to get my right phone number put into my contact conditions. It was easier for me to go and buy signs and go out there and put them up by every gate with my phone number on it than it was to try to get the department to input that information. Now they've gone to an online system, so I can actually go on through my account and change my conditions. I can make sure, so if I'm gonna go away for a week, I can change that phone number in there and update it to whoever's gonna be taking phone calls or whatever. So it's cumbersome, but, working through improvements slowly, I guess. But yeah, if you can't get a hold of a leaseholder, probably the first step is, try to, if you're up in the area, you can find a house, try to go to a house. Second step would be try to get a hold of a nephrologist. The local nephrologist will usually have a contact for somebody. Sometimes those leases are bought and sold or traded, and again, that can take time to have that updated on there as well, right? So someone could have passed away and that phone number just hasn't been updated in the computer yet to the new owner, so. I know it's annoying and frustrating to deal with.
And a lot of discussion, at this ministry advisory committee was around all of these types of issues, right? So what are there was lots of discussion and recommendations that went forward to Minister Lowen, but we don't know what he's gonna do at the end of the day, with any of the recommendations.
Yeah, we're still kind of bound by the terms of reference of that committee, so we're limited as to what we can share with you guys as to what the recommendations were and stuff. It's the final report has been given to Minister Wood now, so it's kind of more to make those decisions. Any more
Are there any
questions?
other questions?
Have you got any partnerships with charitable organizations such as Ducks Unlimited on the grazing lease at the present time?
Not on my lease, I work with Dustin on some of my private land stuff, so they have like a winter cereals program right now. So if you plant something in the fall, and they give you $20 an acre for utilizing that type of program. So, I'll take advantage of those types of things, but, as far as, charity groups or NGOs, not really. I think we're trying to be pretty secretive with some of the stuff we have. There's the more people, if you've ever seen, well, I guess what it would be, Waynesworth, right? There's that scene where it's, I tell two people, and then you tell two people, and you tell two people. It doesn't take long for everybody to know about something, so sometimes the more people that know, we run into issues with that quite a bit, like burrowing owls in my area, and they're along the road. We get, well, this year especially, I get calls from Fish and Wildlife, there's people out there harassing wildlife, right? Driving, starting to stick their cameras down there so they can get a good shot for their Instagram, Facebook page, that kind of stuff, right? So not everybody's as respectful of the wildlife as you'd like them to be.
Most of the programs with Ducks Unlimited or Cows and Fish or, they're not applicable to private. They're only applicable to private. Because the government is the landlord.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so I would like to thank Lindsay and Kyle. Thank you very much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. It was pretty evident to me when we worked together, AWA has a long history of working with ranchers on a variety of different issues, and sometimes that, the hearsay is what causes the issues. So with the current system where you just call in and you hear one person say, well, I called 20 times and no one called me back. There's no way to prove that, right? So hopefully we can get a system where it's more can track that so that there's no hearsay back and forth. And that's what we're hoping for moving forward. We'll see what comes out of the minister after the many months of discussion. However, I really appreciate you coming to sort of share your perspectives, and I learned so much about how what you do is protecting a lot of those wild species and protecting the grasslands, and that's why there's so many requests for hunting there, is because that's where the wildlife goes, because they're not harassed, because the biodiversity is there to support them. But then, of course, there's more pressure from hunting groups to get access, right? And so I think that speaks highly to how well a lot of these lands are sustained by most.
Yeah.
On both sides, there's always going to be issues, but it's very informative and educational, and we want to educate people so that they have a better understanding and hopefully have a broader perspective when they're dealing with you moving forward. So I wish to really just thank you both for coming such a long way to have a discussion with us outside of, right, like your main ranching season. So yeah, I'll leave it there. With that, 2 reminders of things that are coming up. December 7th is Saturday, we're having a Christmas market here at AWA supporting a variety of different local artists. So feel free to drop by and visit our Christmas market on the 7th. And December 12th, Beth Everest has just produced a new book called Some of the Facts, Jasper, When Tales Were Told. So it's fictional, non-fictional, but all the sales from her book will go to, as a Jasper fundraiser. And we're holding that on Thursday night, December 12th. So hopefully you'll come and support that, which will be, I guess, our last two events of the 2024 season. And next year, 2025, is AWA's 60th anniversary. And so there will be lots of great events coming up. So check out our website. So I think that's it. Well, we'll leave it at that.
If anybody's interested, I have extra information that you can take home with you. I would share.
Stuff that's interesting to read through.
And
This little,
I'm such a teacher. Thank you.
even with that team.
I'm feeling better. Yeah. Progress.